Everybody loves a conspiracy theory, but they are most often complete and total nonsense. The vast majority produce thoughts of people wearing tinfoil hats, but they wouldn't exist if conspiracies weren't a real thing. Conspiracies occur all the time in the psychology of the world, and for better or worse. They're in fact a way of life. Every so often, a once labeled crazy conspiracy theory ends up panning out, proving that crazies who believed it were right all along. The 1960s and 70s were a turbulent time in American history. While the country was engaged in a seemingly unending war across the world, the peoples protested and counterculture movement arose. Leading that movement were iconic visionaries. Many were artists, and all of them dangerous, according to the government. One such person of interest was none other than the former Beatle, John Lennon. His songs about giving peace a chance and imagining a world without division and conflict came off as enlightening to his fans, but threatening to the ears of President Nixon. The people knew and understood their resulting in the conspiracy theory that the government spied on him. As it turns out, the government was actually absolutely spying on the singer. And it began in 1971. It started when he arrived in New York on a visa, and he began associating with radical anti-war activists. Not only did they keep an eye on Lennon, but the Immigration and Nationalization Services tried to kick him out of the country. The truth of the surveillance was finally revealed in John Weiner's 2000 book, Give Me Some Truth. Lennon wasn't alone. The FBI spied on just about anyone who had a platform and made public anti-war statements. These days, we all know the dangers of smoking, but it was advertisement as anything but harmful or over a century. In fact, it was touted by doctors as a health product, and cigarettes were delicious. You could find them anywhere, and that includes cartoons. Research started to show the truth of cigarettes in the 1950s, and their apparent link to various forms of cancer. The public began to question the advertisements and claims that had been hit with them over the years. Still, the tobacco companies denied their products' dangerous side effects. This led to the birth of conspiracy theory, claiming that the tobacco company not only knew of the connection between cigarettes and cancer. Decades passed, and Big Tobacco continued to deny the evidence that they uncovered, though their own research was all but clear. Finally, in the 1990s, Philip Morris admitted the truth. From that point forward, society's view of smoking changed, and smoking has declined in many Western nations. Had Big Tobacco coughed up their data decades earlier, it's likely millions of people could have avoided tobacco-related disease and early death. When the U.S. dropped 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the world changed. Nuclear combat was a reality, and it would affect the way nations planned for and conducted military operations around the world. Of course, it took some time before the truth of nature of those weapons was fully understood. Specifically, the effects of nuclear radiation on the human body were unclear. So the U.S. government commissioned a study called Project Sunshine. The goal of Project Sunshine was simple enough. Research showed how nuclear fallout affects human tissue, trying to figure things out in any way that they can when trying to find a test subject. When the project was underway, a conspiracy theory arose claiming that the government was actually stealing dead bodies, primarily babies, to conduct the research. It was a genuinely macabre conspiracy theory, to be sure, but it turned out to be true. The government was using parts of cadavers to test the effects of radiation, and the best kind of the use came from babies. In the US and UK, the government reached out to find recently deceased babies and young children, taking tissue samples and whole limbs. The parts were taken without permission or even notification of some 1,500 families. The Bay of Pigs invasion is a clear failure in the U.S. political and strategic handling of Castro's rise. But it didn't end there. The U.S. government continued to fail in its policies with Cuba, which led to a ton of conspiracy theories. One theory claimed that the U.S. military planned various false flag operations. It would blame it on Cuba. The conspiracy theory proved to be true, through Operation Northwoods never made it out of the planning stages. The reason these were held secret for so long is that Joint Chiefs never wanted to give these up because they were so embarrassed. Some of these plans involved lobbing mortars into the naval base or destroying aircraft with ammo depots. We could develop a communist Cuba terror campaign in the Miami area. We could sink a boatload of Cubans en route to Florida, real or simulated, exploding a few plastic bombs in carefully chosen spots, the arrest of Cuban agents, and the release of prepared documents. Sustaining Cuban involvement also would be helpful in projecting the ideas of an irresponsible government. The world knows all about the mafia's existence these days, but it wasn't always like that. While it's very well known today, the very existence of the mafia was only theorized for nearly a century. It was so unbelievable most people considered it to be a conspiracy theory. It actually makes sense when you think about it, of course. The existence of a large group of criminals operating under a hierarchy structure to monopolize crime in a given area, leading to organized crime. That does sound more like a conspiracy theory rather than reality. The conspiracy theory started to pass around the world in 1890, but it reemerged around 1946. That's when the mafia began to really take hold. It also is the time period shown in The Godfather. Still, it remained a widely held conspiracy theory for decades and didn't come to light until 1962. In fact, the existence of the mafia wasn't actually confirmed to the world until famed mob snitch Joe Valci testified, spilling the beans. Joe acknowledged the existence of the mafia to the U.S. Senate committee in 1962, and the conspiracy theory was finally proven true. And for that, now we have a video game of mafia. You've probably filled your tank with unleaded gasoline hundreds of times without knowing what's actually meant. On the surface, it means there isn't any lead in the gas. Still underneath, it's the result of a widespread conspiracy led by the oil and gas industries. Lead was added to gasoline to reduce engine knock, but adding lead to anything can be a deadly neurotoxins. A long-held conspiracy theory held that oil and gas companies knew the danger and hid it from the public. It all turned out to be true, but it was far more worse than anyone imagined. The companies knew of the dangers of lead, gasoline, as early as the 1900s, but buried it. What's more, a study in the 1920s confirmed that this to be true, and the results were suppressed. At the same time, the companies continued to sing the praises of leaded gasoline. Leaded gasoline was phased out in the US in the 1970s, but ethyl and octyl continued to sell in the Eastern Europe and developing nations for 14 years. The damage done by the vast conspiracy was widespread and likely more damaging than the one carried out by the tobacco industry in the 20th century. Towards the end of World War II, the US and USSR both rushed to gather as many Nazi scientists as possible to develop their own rocketry program. The US did so under Operation Paperclip, which transformed Nazi scientists into American citizens. The operation was entirely secret, but when it started to come out, that men like Warmer von Braun and other high-profile Nazi scientists were behind the American space program. A conspiracy theory arose. It was widely believed that the government covered up or whitewashed numerous scientists' histories, suggesting that they had little to no involvement in Nazi aristocrats. In fact, President Truman insisted that nobody with direct ties could be brought into under operation. While that may have been the intent, the conspiracy eventually proved to be true. Members of the Joint Intelligence Operations Agency, or CIA, did in fact recruit Nazi scientists who took part in various aristocrats. The government simply covered up their involvement so it would be possible to exploit the genius. And it worked. When the reality of the cover-up came to light, George Rickley, Walter Scheinberg, and Arthur Rudolph all left the US in disgrace, but none were found guilty of any crime. If there's one conspiracy theory out there that refuses to go away, it's the one surrounding a crashed UFO in Roswell, New Mexico, 1947. It's a widespread conspiracy theory, and it's likely never going to die. Part of the problem comes from the continuous denials of the Department of Defense that anything extraterrestrial happened in Roswell. Still, claims of a cover-up by the government persist. The DoD may have persisted in claiming that the crash involved a weather balloon, but it turns out something else crashed in Roswell. It didn't have anything to do with aliens, but the government did employ a cover-up to hide the truth. The cover-up came from the desire to keep Project Mogul secret. This was at the dawn of the Cold War, and the US government was all about keeping its various plot secrets from the public, and the Soviet Union, of course. Project Mogul was a Cold War attempt to keep an eye on Soviet nuclear weapons development. The truth finally came out in 1994, confirming the crash involved Project Mogul. While the cover-up part of the conspiracy theory proved true, the claim that aliens were somehow involved persists. While the gay community is more widely accepted these days than it was in the past, it can be difficult to imagine just how bad it was previously. In many Western nations, homosexuality was illegal. This forced people into the community to live their lives in a secret seclusion. While this was more of a problem for the people in the underground community, that didn't mean the people outside left it alone. Government didn't understand gay issues. That bit hasn't really changed too much, and some did bizarre things to counteract the so-called counterculture. There are hundreds of conspiracy theories about the government and homosexuality, issues from the 20th century, but the strangest has to be the one suggesting Canada created a so-called gaydar. The weirdest part of the theory isn't that it's true, it's that the government actually did it, sort of. Canada hired a university professor to create a machine that could detect homosexuality in federal employees. It worked by measuring pupil dilation to same-sex erotic imagery. Canada used the fruit machine, as it was so called, to fire or exclude over 400 men from civil service and the military. Alien conspiracy theories have been around forever thanks to the government secrecy. This is especially true of the US government, which has fostered numerous conspiracy theories, including one that claims the government actively investigated UFOs and aliens. Investigating UFOs is part of the job for the military, seen as it just means unidentified flying object. The alien bit seems far-fetched, but it turns out to be true. Not only did the US government actively search the skies for aliens, but it spent a ton of cash doing it. The Advanced Aerospace Threat Identified program had about $600 million budget, and it had the following purpose: collecting and analyzing a wide range of anomalous aerospace threats, ranging from advanced aircraft fielded by traditional US adversaries to commercial drones to possible alien encounters. The program came to light in the early 2000s, but most people didn't notice until the 2017 release of declassified videos that remain unclear of what's going on. What's your favorite conspiracy theory? Thanks for watching. Have a great one. Bye.